How's it going, Publius?
Doing well, Mod. How are you?
All is well here. So we kind of had a crazy, let's say, weekend or an eventful weekend. And we're hosting this class maybe to recap it, go over it, and then discuss, its overall impact on Beanstalk, or what do we think or our takes from it. So maybe just to summarize it kind of quickly. Silicon Valley Bank had a gap for whatever reasons, what they did. So there was a mismatch for their assets and then the liabilities that they had, which spurred a bank run. This bank run eventually led to the bank being seized and closed. So over the weekend, there was worries over one of their customers, which is Circle. So Circle uses that bank to hold some of their collateral. And that led to USDC depegging. Before we continue there, then on its impact and what happened there, I think what I thought was interesting is that we always kind of looked at USDC as the risk of USDC being centralization and not really, the collateral, or the collateral that it holds was always thought of, as the safe thing to an extent. But there you have it. The vector of attack in this case was that the collateral that Circle was holding was seized, or thought of that it was lost. What are your thoughts on this, maybe Publius? That the risk of collateral is not only the centralization bit, but it's also the risk of losing that asset for whatever reason.
Well, fundamentally, when you're holding cash at a bank, you no longer own the cash, and there's an expectation that the bank is lending out that money. Whereas when you own treasuries directly, and they're held with a custodian, you're now owed something by the government. And so the basic idea is that what happened over the weekend is the percentage of USDC, or the collateral for USDC that was cash, some percentage of it was held at a bank that experienced a bank run, and during the period of time where there was a question as to whether or not the depositors in the bank, particularly the larger ones, would be made whole or not. At that point in time, there was an open question as to whether the cash that, in effect, Circle had deposited or lent to Silicon Valley Bank, whether that was going to be able to be recovered at face value, or at the value that Circle believed. And what was fascinating was how quickly the market moved as soon as the news broke, pretty much, and then the estimations of the pricing of the risk associated with the cash held at Silicon Valley Bank. So there was a lot of real-time discussion happening on Twitter and more meaningfully in the markets around pricing the collateral under USDC, and basically then that also had ripple effects into DAI, which is primarily collateralized by USDC, and related to Beanstalk, both the USDC and the DAI depegs then affected the 3-curve price, where Beanstalk assumes that the value of 3-curve is the virtual price, and in short, there is as has been experienced in the past with a USDT peg, for example, there is no factor from Beanstalk into how much value the USDC or the USDT or the DAI in the pool is actually worth. It's assumed to be $1. And when that's no longer the case and the pool becomes significantly out of balance, then Beanstalk actually is unable to perfectly price or accurately priced even at the moment the value of a bean relative to $1. So a lot of very interesting series of events and different things to talk about related to it, but ultimately it's also a good reminder that the current implementation of Beanstalk is not sufficiently decentralized from the perspective of the majority of, or the entirety of its liquidity at the moment is effectively exposed to things like this USDC fiasco or a similar fiasco for Tether, or even a similar fiasco for DAI, which is a much smaller thing. So the fact that all of Beanstalk's liquidity is still against 3Curve presents a significant risk to the system. So hopefully a Bean ETH pool will alleviate some or a significant portion of that.
So, and the fiasco that you maybe described, Publius, to an extent can be imagined for any maybe asset that trades against Bean. I understand, of course, that ETH in specific is kind of different, given that if something happens to ETH, you'd expect the ecosystem itself to be more of the problem than the price itself. But as you said, having a Bean ETH pool is going to alleviate some of that, let's say, risks. But do you think there is a percentage in general that you'd want to target and be, this is a range that is acceptable? So no asset traded against Bean is more than, 20% or something like that?
So when the stock gauge system is implemented, one of the factors that should likely be considered by the gauge system is the distribution of liquidity that trades against beans. And in theory, it makes sense to have sort of rules or classes of assets that there are limits voted on in some capacity by stockholders. And so what that might look like is the maximum, USDC exposure acceptable to Beanstalk is 20%. And so whether that's in its incentives for Bean USDC or Root USDC or Bean 3Curve, because all of them are ultimately, or even Bean DAI, because all of them are ultimately USDC exposure in some capacity, there could be some cumulative consideration of the liquidity that's being provided, and then the incentives for providing liquidity to Beanstalk change based on how much liquidity there is up to that rule. But then there could be a complementary rule around, there can be, the maximum liquidity Beanstalk accepts held by a single centralized party is, Y or something. And so anything, it would be a similar rule, but it may be slightly different in the sense that there may be assets held by similar custodians or issued by similar asset issuers that are the goal is to limit the exposure to any one issuer of an asset or any one custodian or any one type of asset per se. So the rules in particular will have to be designed thoughtfully, and then also the way that the risks or the relationships between the various assets are encoded on the silo whitelist, such that gauge participants can then vote on the rules, and then the silo knows how to interpret the exposure that it has based on those rules, is not going to be so simple. But that's from a generalized perspective, that's how Beanstalk can try to limit risk to any one issuer.
Okay, Publius, I wanted to maybe discuss a little bit the Oracle point or perspective, let's say. So USDC depegged on chain, and then the price of it dropped until it repegged. At some point, maybe let's say if if you're a USDC holder, you'd be like, I don't want to sell it. I can wait because I believe that, or I don't agree, let's say, with the panic, and I believe that it will repeg or so. Do you think that such an input or an action can be done or implemented on chain, or or can be part of an oracle, basically, where even though the price in that pool went down, we are not going to take action? Is that something valid to think of, or you just have to pick a price, and if it happens, it happens. You can't like wait.
What do you mean by you have to pick a price?
By you have to pick a price, I mean you have to pick a price oracle. So whatever price that comes from from that pool, this is it.
Well, the price oracle can be arbitrary, but you're asking like two different questions. One, where does the price or the BDV of a given asset come from? And then separately, how should Beanstalk think about limiting them? So we should almost bifurcate the discussion, right? And
I was thinking maybe what I was thinking is, do you think having an option to disregard the oracle price is something wise? So Beanstalk will have an input to be like, even though that this is the price oracle that we have, but hey, maybe that's equivalent to oppose or something like that. That we disregard that oracle price.
Would you suggest that in that situation, the depositors continue to receive credit for the BDV, or that they lose stock and seeds for that period of time?
I'm unsure here. I didn't think that far.
Because currently, when you deposit, the issue is that you can't take new deposits if the BDV oracle is paused. Currently, the BDV doesn't update, or you can update your BDV, but it only updates upward. And so to some extent, there's no problem for existing deposits if the BDV oracle doesn't work for a short period of time. But there's a separate question as to whether or not to continue to consider the oracle as valid even when it's known to be invalid. And that seems like a mistake because it introduces some sort of arbitrage opportunity in the system where you can basically take advantage of the inaccurate oracle data, which is obviously suboptimal from Beanstalk's perspective.
Okay. I think this is it from my end on discussing the Silicon Valley Bank, let's say, spinoff. Publius, before maybe having any thoughts on your end, let's pause for a minute here and see if any of the audience want to ask any question about this incident, or anything about Beanstalk in general. Okay, closing thoughts, Publius. What are the major lessons learned from this incident?
Well, there's always a lot to be learned, but the reality is that this was a pretty it was a bank run, and the open question immediately became what's going to happen to depositors, and there was a lot of political pressure to effectively bail out the depositors. And on the one hand, it would have been really horrible for all of those depositors in Silicon Valley Bank to lose their money. On the other hand, this is the continuation of the centralization of banking power and the ability to issue loans. And it's hard to imagine that having a very small set of banks is more optimal than having a lot of smaller community and regional banks, because lending is fundamentally a local phenomenon. And on the one hand, it's great to have big banks that can facilitate massive deals. The heart and soul of a healthy economy should really be small businesses and P2P transactions. And currently, it's looking less and less likely that people and businesses are going to be able to bank with local banks, and that's very unfortunate from our perspective, and it just really further hammers home the need for an alternative for people to access credit in a fair fashion. And furthermore, when you consider how, from an economics perspective, the crash of the bank effectively forced the hand of the government to backstop depositors to prevent a run on all of the other banks. At the end of the day, it's like a philosophical question. Is saving the depositors worth what is effectively creating significant moral hazard of, if you're running a bank, you may lose your job, but your customers are always going to be fine. It's a weird proposition to make to lenders, right? So you can just lend however you want and you'll always be fine. Like, yikes. And this is what happens when the government, and in particular the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, have just such a strong input on the economy right now. And it's in my opinion largely destructive to productivity, that this is the way the incentive structures are working. And so the need for an open system that people can opt into peacefully, that is not, having the scales tipped by a single participant and naturally trends towards more local and P2P transactions, and at some point hopefully loans. Hopefully this is an alternative that people will ultimately find useful. So there's a ton of work to be done to actually facilitate real economic activity, which is something we've spoken about a lot. But this weekend is just a very potent reminder of why Beanstalk is inevitable, from our opinion. And this is where we're going. So we're excited to be on board, and a lot of work to be done.
Agreed here, and it would have been very exciting to see or relive this incident with the Bean ETH pool and see the outcome of it. All right, thank you, Publius, as always, for taking the time to go through this and explain.
See someone typing. Oh, they're saying I sound tired. Yeah, didn't get the best night's sleep last night. Sorry about that coming through.
We still got the good juice though.
All right. Well, take care, everyone.
Thank you. You have a good one.